carbon and biodiversity. And we're really lucky to have 4 different perspectives coming from different backgrounds and different kind of places in our ecosystem of business action on carbon and biodiversity. So with that, I'm just going to dig straight into it, introduce the panelists briefly, and then we'll ask them to give their own intros. And I'm doing this with new technology also today, which is my brand new iPhone. So, very glad to have at the far end, we've got Klaus, VP Head of ESG for Bayer. Next to him, we've got Bianca Nijhof, Associate Director at Anthesis Group. Anthesis, but you said Anthesis, yes? Okay, apologies. And next to this, I've got the privilege of having my husband's boss in the hot seat, Martin Berg, CEO of Climate Asset Management. Kind of a rare angle. And there's none of their colleagues here to see it, I think, so that's too bad. And last but not least, Pina Gervassi with FSC. She is Director of Climate and Restoration. So you can see we've got backgrounds from more than 25 years of one of the leading forestry NGO perspectives here. We've got asset management and investment directly into climate and biodiversity solutions. We've got excellent consulting expertise working with some of the world's most advanced companies on integrating nature into their action. And then we have one of those corporates who's been able to actually push forward a business into scaled climate and nature action. So with that, let's just dig straight into it. We've asked Bianca to go ahead and help us further anchor this story about, where are we with climate and nature? Obviously, building on what Karen has said, the quote that I wrote down from her is, we haven't done enough yet. She said it a few ways, but that's what it boiled down to. We haven't done enough yet. Can you help us understand what that means a little bit and maybe start to point to where we are doing enough?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you. And thank you for having me here today. As a biologist by education, so you're going to get that angle for me. I don't know too much about finance, I said it before, but learning very much there. But I'm very much a biologist and very passionate about nature. And I realize the value nature gives me actually in my day-to-day life and in who I am. So yeah, the introduction from Karen was really good, but I want to share with you some numbers, which might some staggering numbers actually. So, and you probably heard that in the last 50 years, we lost 68% of the biodiversity around the world. 68% in the last 50 years. If you look at the resource depletion, so the natural capital, the natural resources nature provides us with, we're using 1.8 planet nowadays. That's really a lot. And one of the consequences of that is that by 2040, we have a 40% water shortage. 5 billion people will be in lack of water as one of the resources. So if you look at how much do we depend on nature, 55% of the global gross national product depends actually on nature. I tend to think that if I look around, everything is actually a source of nature here. So we are very much dependent as a society on nature. It's a material risk. So there was a research from the World Bench Remark Alliance, which actually, they were looking at 389 companies. And only 5% of those, although the value chain of many of those major businesses contribute to biodiversity loss, only 5% of those 389 companies actually have carried out a science-based analysis to show how their operations impact on nature. Only 5% of those. So another part of that research indicates that nature is this blind spot. 97% of the companies in the benchmark yet have to commit to a nature positive goal. It's less than 1% actually within that benchmark knowing how they depend on nature. Those are really staggering numbers for me. So we really have to start realizing the value nature brings us. So we had the Kunmin COP15, it was referenced to by Karen Soundberger. Major historic landmark deal, I would say. Really, the goal 30 by 30. 30% of the nature globally should be, the land nature should be protected, 30% in the seas. Using 2020 as a baseline, so a couple of years ago. In 2030, moving towards balancing that, just going back to where we are, and by 2050 being nature positive. That's really the goal. Urging companies to, and target 15 is one of those, to be aware of their impacts and dependencies on nature and really mapping that out. This is why we have TNFD. This is why SBTN, Science-Based Targets on Nature, Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures, those developments going on. And is it new? I tend to say, and I'm a biased, I co-authored the Natural Capital Protocol, which was in July 2016 published, which already talks about mapping impacts and dependencies. We had Puma doing the environmental profit and loss in 2012, so we knew about it. But hey, now it's becoming mainstream. So now, hopefully, more organizations are picking up on that. And not only, as Karen indicated as well, it's not only for your own business. Look in your supply chain. There's a huge impact you have in your supply chain. I think Klaus will talk about that later as well. So we know about the staggering numbers, which I just shared with you. They're blowing me away all the time. Our dependencies, well, who we are depends on that. And then only 1% of the companies in the research by the World Benchmark Alliance, only 1% know about those dependencies.
Wow, that's a really impactful number. I have to apologize. This is what happens when I don't print notes. I skipped over letting folks properly introduce themselves. So as we go, and we'll keep going with the questions, but maybe quickly introduce yourselves, and we'll save that little personal tidbit for the wrap-up at the end. But with that, only 5% of businesses really understanding their science-based analysis of what are their impacts on nature, only 1% truly understanding the dependencies. Klaus, you've got experience with being able to be part of a very large organization who's taking this on in a serious way. I wonder if you might just, once you introduce who you are and where you're from again, share with us how you've seen that work within your company. How have you been able to start to see action, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I start with a confession. I'm chemist. Okay, I want to say that just to meet expectations right from the beginning for the corporate position. But now, without joking, I mean, my transformation from a chemist into the person I'm today involved the most important time in my professional life was probably when I was tasked to lead the regulatory department for insecticides, and I was exposed to the controversial conversations on bees, pollinators, and our insecticides. And what I realized is that there was no conversation between our company and even our industry and the public. I just realized we had our position, and we call our products, by the way, crop protection, and the rest of the world calls them pesticides, and we were just, they say yes, and we say no. And that was a very fixed mindset on both sides, which I found horrible, and no pathway. And I think this has brought me to the place where I am today, because the more you go out and listen, the more you understand that everybody's sitting in his fixed positions, and that's not the pathway to go. So what I want to say is, if we talk about biodiversity, nature-based solutions, we always talk about trade-offs. Whatever we do, whenever we do biodiversity measuring in agriculture, for example, we need to accept that agriculture impacts biodiversity, being it organic, being it conventional, it doesn't matter. So from along those lenses, I think it's a good way to start into the conversation that everybody needs to acknowledge that everybody is part of the solution and the problem at the same time. That was horribly difficult for an organization like Bayer or any other big company to acknowledge that we have that duty to change. And in 2018, after the acquisition of Monsanto, when the wind was blowing straight into our face, it was the moment to acknowledge that agriculture has actually to deliver against 3 major issues. That's how we analyzed. Was it scientific enough? I don't know. But we tried to analyze our situation. We said agriculture needs to continue to provide sufficient amounts of food. I mean, that's just what agriculture is there for. And it was the narrative of the industry over decades. We are providing the food. Okay. But at the same time, we need to reduce impact on climate change and biodiversity loss. So it's almost a paradox. Produce more and protect better at the same time. And this is how we started into this. I have to be honest, in a big corporation and in business, if you're not able to connect these ambitious goals, like, for example, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing environmental impact of crop protection / pesticides, if you can't connect it to a business case, it's going to fail. And that's the challenge, and that's my passion, is find the business case in sustainable transformation. And it can work, but it requires a lot of effort, and you work basically against a lot of traditional perspectives inside and outside of the company.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I'm hearing, I didn't hear the specific word, but to me it was anchoring in this concept of purpose. So what is your company's purpose out there? You're there to grow food for nutrition for the world. How are we going to do that, knowing that we have to be part of the problem to be part of the solution? Something we talked about earlier was looking for nature-based solutions first. That ties in with Karen's concept of first kind of reduce the bad in your business chain before looking to what you can do good, and then going beyond value chain. Martin, you had some interesting thoughts from Climate Week. How many people in the room were at Climate Week in New York 2 weeks ago? Okay, a good number. Yeah, good. So I don't know, I didn't go. I actually hibernated that week and decided not to travel. And I was like fiendishly looking at LinkedIn to see which events were any good and what was going on and was anything new and what new paper had anything good to say. And I don't know what to think about the week. So Martin was there. You shared some ideas that I think are going to be really helpful here, tying into Klaus's perspective of moving a business forward with a business case and its purpose, but also to Bianca's point, business has blind spots. And blind spots are usually, there's not like a present waiting in your blind spot usually. There's usually a clown or something scary. I don't know, Martin, what did you get out of Climate Week, and how can a business start at a time when it's kind of so confusing, tumultuous? Are we greenwashing, greenhushing, greening up?
So, yeah, well, first, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for jumping in just short notice and helping us out here, MaryKate. So, yeah, my name is Martin. I'm the CEO of Climate Asset Management. Perhaps first to what are we doing, who's Climate Asset Management? I think Karin really laid it out so nicely, and we've done exactly the same analysis 3 years ago when we formed Climate Asset Management, that we saw I think and you as well, Anna, but what we need to do is very clear. Now the question is how, and I think it resonates, what we are trying to do resonates very much what Klaus mentions, like how can you actually build a business case around it. But the belief was of our company was that actually this knowledge, what we need to do, and it goes beyond just climate, on nature and biodiversity, will in the long term mean that we have to shift capital, and in the long term also it will mean that there's some business opportunities around that. So we're a firm believer, and we've seen this on climate, that we generally, as humans, we see a problem and we only focus on the risk side, but then we also say, well, everywhere where there's a risk, there's also an opportunity, and this is how we try to create the company. So offering scalable investment solutions for investors that actually want to make this change, because we noted there are actually very little opportunities, in particular for very mainstream investors, to do that. So Climate Asset Management is an asset management firm. We are founded by HSBC Asset Management and Pollination. We are now 3 years in business, and we try to develop these type of vehicles. What we noted very early on is that beyond more traditional investors, which, I mean, hope I don't offend anyone here in the room, but which tend to be much more difficult to get convinced about investing in nature, the corporates are actually the one that lead this field. So we raised at the end of last year over 650 million in capital, and the majority of that was actually coming from the corporate sector. When we founded our firm, we actually 3 years ago, the idea with HSBC and Pollination was that it would be the other way around. It would actually be the investors that would be lining up, because they see that they have to change. They see that this is the next big topic, and I think it was really well laid out. But I think the discussions, they, for various reasons, and that's not the conference to get into that, but there are a few, they're not doing it. So what we've seen is that corporates came out very clearly, I think, from 2 lenses at the moment. I think there's one lens which is clearly to see, to focus on the most, I would say, like, and it goes all to the ways how to make a business case, is really to focus on the carbon side of nature. So nature on the one hand side, of course it's influencing climate, but it's also one of the big solutions to actually tackle climate change, nature projects, and there are many corporates around the planet that are doing that. So what we are doing, for example, we're running one of our funds we're running is a carbon fund, where we're helping corporates to invest in nature-based solutions to achieve a multiple of benefits, but actually the real value at the moment, or the only value they're really deriving out of that mainly are the carbon certificates. So that's one way, but I think the other trend we are seeing now more and more is that a lot of corporates are saying we're going beyond that. We want to actually go into what we call nature positivity, and I think it resonates very much to the whole fact that, I mean, both of you laid it out why. The trouble there at the moment from that perspective is that the business case is so much more difficult to make at the moment if you're focusing on that side, because there are very little revenue streams that are directly related from nature beyond carbon that can actually make this business case for a firm. And so it's a much fuzzier argument, and we see that. But I think, and now linking it to climate week, I think what's interesting is because there was so much focused on the carbon side, And many firms chose, in particular, nature-related investments to also reduce their own carbon emissions, part of their net zero strategy. I think the whole criticism around the carbon markets now actually is leading to a situation where I think it's a much more challenging market, and actually has also an influence now on nature investments, because the one thing that made it actually easy to engage is the one that's the most criticized. And we're seeing a big trend that either firms are just saying, we're continuing to study how we can engage, and maybe we do some risk analysis, and we're having a strategy offsite, and we will discuss it on the board level, but they don't do anything on the one hand side, or they're actually doing quite a bit, but they're not talking about it. And I think this is the whole green hushing phenomenon that we're seeing, and I think that was, for me, came really clearly out in New York at the climate week, that many corporates are saying we're doing all those things, but we're really, really worried about talking about it.
Yeah, there's definitely not a news environment now that is welcoming to sticking your neck out in this space, which I think is a really unfortunate turn. And it's encouraging to see so many folks in the audience today who are here to keep acting and willing to come learn and to improve it together. And that's something that for me as a practitioner, I think we just all need to be very honest about. We're learning while doing, we're open to being transparent and having feedback along the way so we can keep improving, because the scale of the emergency is not in our favor to sit and wait to get it perfect at this point. With that in mind, and also a couple of very small words that Karen used that I love is both and. And when I think about forestry in particular and our opportunity, the FSC has always been at the forefront of making sure that forest management is not just about any one thing. It's not just timber, it's not just water, it's not just wildlife. Pina, can you share with us from your perspective how FSC is evolving as an organization alongside these same trends?
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Pina Gervassi. I am a Peruvian forester and climate and restoration director at FSC. And I've been around FSC for about 23 years, almost one of the first employees in the organization. So I have seen this evolution, and I will talk about this evolution from the three main topics that I think are quite significant and connected to the discussion here. One is that being a forester, of course, I was very motivated and inspired by this organization developing the highest forest management standards for responsible forest management, and developing this dialogue between these different sectors, indigenous peoples, NGOs, and companies. So FSC started as a performance-based standard, very focused on also processes and demonstration on the ground of the social, environmental, and economic benefits. And through the years, we were able to evolve to a more outcome and impact orientation. And in 2019, we launched a new procedure that we call the Ecosystem Services Procedure, that it's an extension of forest management certification, and helps verify positive impacts on ecosystem services. That includes carbon, biodiversity, water, soil, and ecotourism. That evolution allowed FSC to be able to deliver baseline data on these ecosystem services, also to include impact indicators and management practices to help monitor and report on those impacts. And furthermore, and this is the second, I think, evolution that the organization has been through, I think we have evolved from kind of the most relevant responsible forest management, timber and fiber certification standard, to a system that is now used by the corporate sector also for conservation and restoration. And I can put some examples. We have wineries now certified with FSC, like Viña Concha y Toro in Chile, the national parks in Uganda certified also with the Ecosystem Services Procedure. The third big element, I mean, going beyond timber and fiber supply chains to be more impactful on demonstrating claims on ecosystem services and positive impacts on those, I think it's about how we engage with the world in terms of, we started as a very industry-oriented system, working a lot on business to business and within supply chains. And we saw the need to get more involved with consumers, and we see now a massive power of consumers in purchasing decisions. In the last report that was developed by Ipsos, a market survey, we have found out that more than 50% of the global population from the 33 countries that we did the research on recognize the FSC label as a label that demonstrates responsible forest management and forest conservation and protection. And this is also evolving in developing areas of the world, not only in Europe and North America, but also in Asia and Latin America in particular. So this evolution from being a B2B, very industry-oriented, towards a more consumer-oriented system, being able to deliver messages that will make consumers and the civil society more aware on the role of forests and nature-based solutions against climate change. I think this has been a very big thing for us. And the third big element is, of course, how we can use technology and digital platforms in a way to support credibility, integrity of our claims. So we're working very actively now. We have a technology consortium with leader technology companies helping us, from remote sensing, blockchain, and other, artificial intelligence and other digital measures on how to support and strengthen the credibility of the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Pina. Truly fascinating the way FSC has really evolved into a much larger movement around ecosystem services. I think it's very inspiring. I'm fascinated a little bit on the notion of raising money from corporates and the corporates that are willing to act, because fundraising is not for the faint of heart, whether it's institutional or corporate. Question I'm going to pitch probably first to Bianca and Martin together, and maybe Klaus might have something to add in. Do you see conditions that are really what are the characteristics of a corporate that's ready to act, or the condition you can change that's really going to catalyze them from theory or review into action? And Bianca, I know you work with corporates to help them develop and then implement plans. And Martin, you're probably doing quite a lot of what I would normally call investor education or engagement, but with a different target. Maybe talking from those two different perspectives.
Yeah, I can talk to a number of examples. So maybe also as a sort of introduction still from my side. I'm the Associate Director with Anthesis Group, globally leading the nature and water practice. And I have a background obviously in nature, but also worked in the water sector for a long time. Being Dutch, water is kind of also part of my DNA, I would almost say. And maybe as a part of that, so we had the nature conference last year, COP15 Montreal. I'm not sure whether all of you know, we only had 2 water conferences. One was, which are of a different level. It wasn't a COP, but it was just a conference. The first one we had 46 years ago. The last one we had last year in March. Shows how important we think water is. Understatement. But yeah, no. So maybe the first example I want to give actually, because there's different. What I notice, corporates, the front runners really get it, and they are actually. We have a couple of companies who ask us already, okay, how can we contribute to nature positive? Yes, we know we need to measure. We don't know the exact numbers, but we just want to do it. So how can we actually contribute to nature with something which relates to our business? So not something far off, but something which is linked to the products we do. Agricultural sector, it's quite easy, I would say, but what if you're an IT sector in the IT sector, for example? So really then trying to find the projects to invest in, or even if it's an organization having a lot of campuses, how can you actually contribute to nature on the side of your campus? And obviously you have species on the side of your campus, but those species don't stick to the borders of your campus, they go wider. So how can you actually contribute by having these hotspots of nature while you're contributing them to the nature as a coming to the nature in the wider area as well? So that's really the front runners. The others, because it's agri-food, so your product is related to that. And maybe just let me give you one example also. So part of the company I work for is also in the Netherlands. It's Climate Neutral Group. They have been working on carbon and carbon compensation and developing their own carbon-related projects for more than 20 years. And I always like the example if you look at it in an integrated way. So they work with the Dutch water sector, providing us with the clean drinking water, and they actually invest with those organizations in cooking stoves in Africa. And you would say, what does that have to do with nature and with water? Well, by actually providing the cooking stoves to the people, it's obviously a health issue. So they're not cooking in their houses with wood. They're cooking with cooking stoves. It's positive for their health. But because you're providing cooking stoves, there's less carbon, not burning the wood. It has a positive impact not collecting the wood. That has a positive impact. And actually, apart from providing the cooking stoves, they're also providing other technological solutions for really cleaning the water. So in many ways, it has an impact. And in the end, working on this water issue, it has an impact on nature as well. So I would also, the other point I want to stress is that don't always look for the obvious solutions, look beyond the obvious and think into the indirect impacts you can have, which in the end lead to an impact on nature.
Martin, do you want to add in?
Yeah, from our side, I think it's almost, yeah. The normal step is that those corporates that either have the highest impact or the most impacted are the ones that act first. I mean, and that's very logical in a way. We've seen this on climate as well. I think what the whole kind of vast increase of attention, also research, obviously makes it much easier to kind of see some of the trends and then also relate it to firms either supply chain or other activities. I think the first actions we see is usually within the supply chain because there are lots of low-hanging fruits, right? So, for example, I mean, you said as a reduction of pesticides is not only good for biodiversity, but can also be a huge cost saving, right? So I think the more we've seen this again on energy efficiency is the same, right? There are some low-hanging fruits that firms can very easily address. I think where it gets more difficult is when you go beyond that, and then how do you make that case internally? There we see usually it starts with disclosure. That's why we believe that the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures is a really important initiative, and it started now to kind of really kick off. We've seen this on climate, that the moment companies, financial institutions actually have to disclose on some of the related risks, that actually then immediately puts some things in the spotlight. And someone in the corporate will say, well, we can't continue doing that, can we, right? So, and it can be for risk reasons, it can be for reputations reasons, it can be for all sorts of, it can be for cost reasons. So I think then that allows to build a business case. Where I think it gets the hardest is to go beyond what you should do. So the beyond value chain, from our view where we sit, is a really difficult discussion for many firms because it is something to say that we should actually go beyond that, and how do you make the business case for that? I think and for some firms actually there is a good case and they can make it, but it's not an obvious one. So I think it's a really cascading up. But so that's why we are again, maybe we were a bit early 3 years ago, but that's the trend we've seen, and that's why we were excited to form the firm, and we're really hoping now that with more disclosure, more and more action will come, and that will then also mean that more corporates, but also in particular also the financial sector will say, look, there are some risks, that we actually haven't seen, and we have to do something about it.
Of course, I would love to make some comments, and I pick on the low-hanging fruits. I think the low-hanging fruits are collected. Like 5 years ago was the time when every company made massive commitments. Every leader wanted to be on stage in Davos making the next biggest announcement, and all the companies did. And now you will see that the walkers separate from the talkers. And this is exactly where we are arriving now. So my first pledge would be you need to have leaders in the companies who are really committed to keep walking, even though it's becoming much more complicated. That's the first thing. The second thing is these conversations around offsetting, is it credible, is it serious or not, is okay, as long as it's not destructive. Because I think offsetting is a fantastic mechanism where the private sector puts money on the table to enable others to do good things. We need to protect this. We need to make it right. It's not good enough, but we can't destroy it. So this is something which everybody in the room has to help, that we are not destroying something, and we are in a very critical moment that we are close to do that, which is so helpful and which would, for me, have a super negative impact. On disclosure, anything we do is not taken serious if we are not disclosing, even under assurance. It's not working. But it's a pledge to the politicians that while the Europeans are coming with disclosure regulations, the new CSRD, which is asking us to disclose each and everything at the same time, a little bit ignoring that things like biodiversity are not as mature, 10 years behind carbon in terms of accounting, but we are all falling under accounting rules. It's making our life very complicated. While in other jurisdictions like the US, they try to disclose nothing. I mean, the proposal of the SEC is very slim, and they have such big problems to get this through. And if we don't have more convergence in regulation of disclosure, big companies will be in huge trouble. this is something I want to say. And the last thing I want to say is, in the end of the day, whether companies keep walking, the talk depends on the investors, at least for the big companies. So don't sit back and wait for regulations to do the job. Don't sit back and wait for companies to do magic things. Come to the companies, come to Bayer and say, we want you to do this, and then we will make an investment. That's the best way to do ESG on a practical grounds. And it can work. We have just, 1 week ago, we disclosed a nice press release or a statement on our webpage. We did such an investor engagement. We have no time to lose. Wait for others to do the job. So we should really make concrete steps together with investors, and I think that's the most effective thing to demonstrate action.
I could not agree more. I think you've really hit the nail on the head in terms of the role of regulation in some cases, but also voluntary action and the commitment to keep acting even amidst uncertainty. And I think one piece of good news is, don't worry, on the other side of the pond, we are seeing the regulation, we're seeing the types of disclosures that are demanded. And I think the voluntary side, like TCFD and TNFD, are going to filter through and have a really big impact on businesses throughout the US and the rest of the world, I hope. My personal worry is when do we get past disclosure and into action? And Martin, you touched on that. When you start disclosing something that feels a little icky, you're going to want to act on it. And hopefully the investor side will demand some of that action going forward. Because we've covered what we were going to dive into on regulation and voluntary initiatives, let's take a left turn, which I did not prep this panel on. So I'm going to go to Pina first, because I know she'll have something to say. What about the social dimensions of carbon and biodiversity? Can you maybe share some reflections on how that side is changing while we're adding nature into the climate story, or vice versa, making nature its own story?
Yes. Well, I think talking about the ESGs, I have the feeling that we keep listening a lot of discussions on the environmental issues, but not so much on the social and how you implement real social indicators for your ESG purposes. And I believe that one of the biggest gaps and challenges for getting more investment, in particular into forests, is related to the lack of the poor social license to operate of many of these investment operations, in particular in the places that have more opportunities for growth, like the Amazon or the Congo Basin. There is still a lack of connection with the territories, and also a lack of universal tools to implement, such as, for example, free, prior, and informed consent. Considering that more than 50% of forest area is managed currently by indigenous peoples all over the world, that will be the future of nature-based solutions and forest-based solutions, and that remains, I think, a big challenge and a huge gap as we see it. But at the same time, it brings huge opportunities. Regarding the markets, credibility on carbon markets is becoming increasingly relevant for these discussions. Indigenous peoples do not feel comfortable with investors and buyers of carbon credits. There is a huge need to provide more integrity, quality, and credibility to those processes, and to integrate better due diligence processes, I think, at local levels by the financial institutions. But from our side, we are doing also something relevant on this. For the ecosystem services procedure, we're now incorporating indigenous cultural values as impacts as well. And that was a motion passed by our membership in our last General Assembly last year, which basically put ecosystem services, environmental values in the same category as social values and indigenous people's cultural values.
Thanks, Pina. Because we're just coming up on time in a few minutes, I should have prompted, if there are questions from the audience, we would love to take any. If someone has one right away, we can go for that now. Great, okay. Do we have an extra mic, or I can pass this one off so they can hear you online? I feel like Oprah. Okay.
Thanks so much. Ed Asali from Zulu Ecosystems. We're in the business of looking at land use optimization, so I totally accept the point of trade-offs. The thing that I'm a little bit worried about is when we talk about the positive, to what extent is there a systemic problem, in a sense, where unless people actually accept that the system that they're a part of is part of the problem and needs fundamental reform, that actually we're actually continuing to press for the wrong behaviors, the wrong outcomes. So I'm specifically thinking about pesticides and crop protection. You know, we could think of about OPEC being in the business of protecting oil producers, but that's not necessarily a good outcome, and it's not necessarily one that we want.
Thanks. Klaus had invited me to push him on pesticides, so I'm glad you beat me to it.
Two quick ones on this. For me, one of my best moments after 20 years of Bayer was when our former CEO of Agriculture went on stage and opened his speech by saying, the title of the presentation was "How can we feed this planet without starving it?" CEO of Berg Crop Science. That was an acknowledgement which hadn't taken place before. It's connected to a commitment that we have put up in 2019 that we want to reduce the impact of our products on the environment by 30%, and we measure this and we report it under assurance every year in the sustainability report. So we completely agree. If it's just lip service, it's not flying. And now is the moment when all those who are just making nice speeches will be dismantled and then eventually even taken to court. So I agree with you, and you should hold the companies accountable for what they say, and you should challenge them to say more. But the engagement is what is so important, because otherwise there are a lot of investors who don't care. And then basically you leave us to them. Don't do that, please.
If I can also jump in, because I think I see this as one of the main problems. I hear this a lot. It's like, don't we have to have a fundamental change? Don't we have to make it completely different? And I actually think, well, I think if we all probably agree, if we had a chance to change things, we would change it dramatically. I think the reality is that it will take time to get there. And I think this argument, we have to have a radical change, and it has to be whatever we do has to be absolute perfect. I think also allows lots of people not to do anything, because we can't do anything, right? We're not there yet. It will take us too long. And I think that's something we should accept. It's the same discussion on net zero, phasing out fossil fuel. I just advise everybody to look at the IPCC report, how much oil we will still use in 2050, and it's not zero, right? So it's the same way. So I think by not saying this is a journey, and we can actually incrementally improve, also on talking about nature, increasement on biodiversity. That's, for example, what we are doing with another fund, Natural Capital Fund, where we're doing exactly that. With every project we're doing, where the concept is we're leaving the land better than we found it. But we have an impact, right? So we're doing agriculture project, forestry project, right? So even though we're using FSC, there's an impact, right? We're taking some wood out, otherwise you don't have a revenue model. So I think I find that is at the moment the most difficult discussions, and I see corporates either saying we're continuing doing this anyway, but we're not talking about it because we don't want to get criticized, or they're just saying can't do anything at the moment. We're not winning anything by doing this. And I think that's the biggest danger at the moment. I would agree with Klaus. It applies to the whole question on offsets. There's so many other activities that corporates at the moment are doing. And I think we're really in a situation where I wish that, in particular, some of the NGOs would actually stand up and saying, look, yes, it's not perfect, but at least they're doing something and they're doing it the right way, and we're supporting that. And I don't see that. So
I would actually answer the question in two ways. One, as a biologist, I would say we're part of nature. So once we start realizing, we start maybe taking care of it in a better way, realizing that we're then taking care of ourselves. The second part, second answer would be the mitigation hierarchy, which is now R3T within the Science-Based Targets of Nature. It actually talks about whenever you do something, first try and do it without an impact at all, a negative impact at all. Then if you still have to do it, try and compensate for it or try and manage it in the direct surroundings, and especially for biodiversity, it's a very important one, because you can't compensate a forest in the Amazon with a peatland in Siberia, for example. That's two different ecosystems. So really try, if you can't avoid any damage, try and solve it with improving again the nature, the biodiversity in the direct surroundings. And if you have to do it further away, still try and match it with what you're impacting on. But the first thing is try and avoid any damage. And if that's ingrained in our thinking, I think we also will come to, we probably will treat nature in a different way.
Great. I think we're almost up on time. And so I'm going to do something, we have one more question. Hopefully we can take that into coffee, because I have been given the signal, since we're hybrid and virtual as well. Two quick things to end. And so you now get 2 sentences instead of 1, because I didn't give you the time to properly introduce yourselves. One of the introductory questions was meant to be, kicking off on a hopeful note and a note of purpose. Why are you in this field? What is it that keeps you in this? The second thing is we're not looking at our average CIFB attendees. We're looking at the CEOs of the Nature Action 100 companies. If you don't know what Nature Action 100 is yet, ask someone at coffee, launched just recently. What would be your one piece of advice? Not to ask for them, but advice to those CEOs on nature. So one, why are you here? Two, what are you telling your CEO? Start at the far end with Klaus.
I think I said it. I love sustainable business transformation because I think that's the call. That's what we all have to do together. That's my purpose. That's why I do what I do. My call to CEOs on nature and other things is lead by example. Don't wait others to do the job. Lead by example. It's also a little bit a call to us Europeans. I mean, if we ask others not to cut their forests, look at our own forests. They are in terrible shape. As long as our forests are collapsing, how can we ask others to keep their forests alive? So lead by example. If everybody leads by example, it's going to be much better.
Just go down the line.
I'm actually here because I think this is what change can be made, and these are the people in the room who can make a difference. What I would say is don't fear the complexity, but have the courage to really start acting with what you need. You need to do. You know how to make the future related to nature, and connected to that. Pick this project which links to your business. You know is going to be nature positive, acknowledges indigenous communities, which I think is very important, and start acting on it now. Stick to the measuring can be done later. Start acting now.
On the first question, why am I doing this? I was always a firm believer. I've worked before a lot also in the public sector, and I've seen there's always a tendency to create smaller, perfect investment opportunities. And I think I'm a firm believer we need to get the mainstream finance into this. And I think that was the whole idea about climate asset management, and that what really keeps me on how can we get, let's quote unquote, the real capital into this space, and that requires a different discussion, and that's why I would actually keep the discussion with the CEOs very simple, because I think, and you outlined this, probably of the top 100, over 80 still don't have this on their radar. I would basically just really simply saying, look, this is the next topic. Biodiversity in nature is the next topic that you will have to address. You have to take it seriously. You can't go around it. It's not climate. It's not dealt by just going by net zero. It's a completely different the problem, and tackle it in the same way you tackle the net zero or the climate crisis.
On the first question, I've been blessed to be born in a country where it's very, very biodiverse, as Peru, and very connected to the Amazon and all the indigenous peoples. And now I'm blessed to be a shareholder of conservation concession in the Peruvian Amazon. And that's my motivation. And my recommendation is that when companies, and in particular the financial sector, talks about ESGs, go beyond reducing emissions, think about maintaining ecosystems, and also the social implications that are connected to the broader ecosystem approach, and include KPIs on social and environmental issues within your loans and other processes. So, thank you.
Thank you all. I hope everyone enjoyed this opening panel, and it'll give us some food for thought as we continue through the next couple of exciting days. To summarize, I think those recommendations were basically pay attention, get moving, and be courageous. So let's do it. Thanks.